Okay, everyone, welcome to week 4. My name is Bree and I'm one of the lecturers in Prep Skills, and I'm joined today by our unit coordinator on chat, Trixie, and Bridge is also here as a helping hand, maybe if the roof doesn't fall in on him. He's having some construction done today, but mostly you'll be hearing from me and Trix. So, welcome everyone to everyone's favourite module, or at least one of my very favourites, probably no one else's. We're going to learn all about research skills this week and finding and evaluating scholarly research. So, as always, we respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live, work and learn, and we pay our respects to the First Nations people and their elders past, present and emerging, according great respect for their knowledge and wisdom. Okay, so today, first of all, we are going to do a little bit of a definition. So get you around some of these terms that you might not have heard of before. So we're going to look at information literacy and what is it? You might be thinking, what does that mean, Bree? And then I'm going to explain why you need it. Then in part B, we're going to actually put some of these this information in place, and we're going to look at some practical tips for finding and evaluating research. So this module, module 4, sort of takes a bit of a change from what you've done in modules 1, 2 and 3. Those first 3 modules are very much about self-reflection, whereas now we're looking more at our sort of harder academic skills. So moving away from that reflective sort of looking at ourselves and looking at more of this practical stuff that we're going to need to put in place. So this will relate very heavily, this module and our next module, module 5, to essay writing for university. So anyone who is doing it next term, this will obviously come in handy. And anyone doing it this term, some of this information might already be like information you've heard in EWU. But don't fret, we'll also have some new information, and it's always good to have a bit of a refresher, so to make sure that you're revisiting and understanding these ideas. So, first of all, are you taking notes? Remember, we talked about it in week 2. Notes can help us engage, they can help us learn more deeply. So please make sure as you're going through this lecture that you're taking notes. Okay, so another little bit at the top, we have what's called the Information Literacy Guide in this module. You can find it in additional resources on the week 4 tile on Moodle. So it looks like this. You download it as a PDF. And although it does live in the additional resources, it is still a really great guide. It goes into a bit more depth. So we sort of look over the surface stuff, give you some good information to start working with, but the Info Lit guide goes even deeper. We have lots of students that download this, print it, keep it right through their study journey. So if you want some more information after this lecture, or you want to go a bit deeper and understand a bit more, please download that guide. Okay, so today, A, information literacy. So this is going to help you take notes, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, everybody. So we're going to start with information literacy, what it is, why we need it, and then our practical tips. So it might be worth in your book, on your iPad, on your laptop, whatever form you are taking your notes in, to write these terms down. So first of all, why do we need research? So at university, you're going to be asked to write about lots of different topics. And funny enough, you're going to have to investigate those topics before you rush ahead and write. So even though you might feel like you know something about a topic, you're still going to need to back that up with evidence. And that's where research comes in handy. So we need to investigate, and we also need an informed opinion. So backing up our sources with, backing up our information with scholarly sources. Now, unfortunately, we find that students who have no idea how to research can often be disappointed. So sometimes they end up with just really long, frustrating searches. They end up with poor quality resources, which leads to poor assignments, poor results, sad students. So that's not what we want for you. We want to hopefully make your lives easier Happy students is what we're going for. So hopefully today we can give you some tools to make it a bit easier in future. All right, so a couple of questions at the start. What does the word research mean to you? So have a think, pop it in the chat. What do you think research means? Give you a little minute.
Here we go. So far we've got finding information, finding new information, discovering, locating information in sources. And that word source is a good one.
Yes.
Bree will use that later. Searching for answers. No bridge. Google it. Finding information on a certain topic. Yes, so we're digging a little bit deeper, gathering information from, I like this, credited sources. Good. So we're using the terminologies we need. Searching, finding information, learning all views. Love that. Learning all views, expanding knowledge. Great. Kevin, Rabbit Warren. It can be at times. Finding information to further your education. Good one. That's it, Michael.
Impressive.
Yeah, and searching for a topic that may have been explored by someone else. Yeah, so everyone, they're grasping it. They understand that depth of really having to search for new information. And I like the way they've used that accredited sources of information. So well done.
Some terms we get finding stuff. So
yeah. Haven't got that one yet.
I'm impressed by these answers. Well done. So my second question is, if my clicker works, there we go. What feelings do you have associated with research? What are the feelings that come to mind when you think about research and having to do research?
Oh, curiosity.
Ooh.
That's a strength, curiosity. Oh, Paige finds it boring, which is fine.
I was waiting for that. There's always someone. It's probably many.
Stress, doom, and struggle. So there's a real sort of a deficit negative view there. Amy's excited. Some find it time consuming. Yes. So much to process, and that's, yes, stressful. Oh, Kyle says it's an epiphany. You're learning and learning, and it's build on that punishment. Carla. Range from interest to dull, which is true. Sometimes it can be really boring. Other times it really isn't interesting, and you've got to watch you actually don't go off track. Some find it anxious. Stressful but enlightening. Bree says links to wisdom. Oh. And yeah, Michael again, down the rabbit warren.
Yeah.
Sometimes frustrating. So yes, they've captured it, because it can sometimes be ultra frustrating and stressful, and other times it can be really enlightening and enjoyable. So
that's right, definitely. So often when we ask students how they feel about research, we get similar answers. So things like frustrating, it might be a bit intimidating. Some people find it satisfying. I personally find it quite satisfying, like being able to find things and lock things down and understand things better. Interesting, I think a couple of people mentioned, but probably the one I want to stress is that it's important. So whether or not it's frustrating, boring, intimidating, it is important, and it's something you need to learn. So sorry, everyone that might be feeling that way. Hopefully I can relieve some of that. I don't know if I can do much about the boredom, but maybe the frustration and the intimidation I can fix. So, as I said first, we're going to give some definitions around some of these terms. So our first one is information literacy. So this is a really specific sort of uni term. But has anyone come across this before? Can any really smart cookies give me a bit of a definition of what information literacy might be? That might be a tall order, but
let's wait to see what
we'll have a go.
Here we go. Oh, ability to decipher credibility. Okay.
Ooh, yeah.
And good selection of content. See if anyone else. Here we go. The ability to source relevant information. Liking it.
Yeah.
So there's 3 strong ones.
Very good.
And let's just see if there's. Yep, here's another one. Yeah, separate useful information from, to separate useful information from not useful information. So Amy says, if you're illiterate, you don't understand. So to be literate in something is to understand.
Oh,
Like
yep.
the way you've broken that down.
Yeah, good job,
Yeah.
Amy.
Yep.
Mm.
Kyle, know your something meter. That's good.
Yeah, so information literacy, I'll give you the official definition from the Association of College and Research Libraries. They say that it is a set of abilities requiring individuals to recognise when information is needed, have the ability to locate, evaluate, and use effectively the needed information. So this is an important skill, especially when we're living in the digital age with the internet. We are bombarded with so much information. So it's really important to know how to sort of negotiate this onslaught and find our way around it. Now, let's break this down because this is a bit of a wordy definition, but let's break it down a little bit. So the key parts we want to look at is recognizing when information is needed, actually being able to locate the needed information, evaluate, and be able to effectively use whatever we've found. So those are sort of the areas we want to focus on. So I think you all really got there in the chat when you were giving those definitions. Pretty much we touched on most of these points, so well done. So in prep skills, we are going to look at these 4 points. Like I said, we're going to plan our research. So that's our first thing. We're going to find scholarly texts. We're going to evaluate those scholarly texts. And we're going to manage and present our research. Now, today I'm going to cover the first 3. Next week in Module 5, there's a little bit on the manage and present your research. But really where like the rubber hits the road, where you're really going to be managing and presenting is in essay writing. So we just sort of give you the tools to get started, but where you're going to put this in place is there. So let's start with number 1, planning our research attack. So this might seem really obvious. Of course you have to plan, great, Brie. But you'd be surprised how many people sort of just jump in the deep end and don't really have a plan, or they sort of just read over the topic briefly. And the problem with that is you end up sort of drifting through cyberspace, sort of aimlessly, not finding, anywhere in particular you need to be. A bit like this sort of classic TV show, Lost in Space. This was remade in 2018, so people might have seen this one. So we don't really want to do that. We don't want to be drifting around. So part of planning our research attack is being a bit strategic. So we want to have a bit of a plan of what we're actually going to do. We want to analyze our topic and we want to understand what we're actually doing. So we don't want to jump in just yet. Take a step back. So to do this, we want to identify our focus. So this involves reading your assignment carefully. I can't stress that enough, carefully, so you know what you're actually researching. You want to know what the question's asking you and what the critical issues are. Now, I know, again, seems very, very obvious, but you'd be so surprised how many people, me included, because I'm easily distracted and overly excited, I read a topic, I say, great, it sounds wonderful, love it. Off I go down the rabbit hole that someone mentioned in the chat. I find all this information. I go back and I read that topic again and I think, ugh, I'm sort of close, vaguely, but not quite. I've found information in a sort of different area. I've gone off on a tangent. So instead, if we start with a bit of a plan and we really drill into our topic, that hopefully won't happen. So we're going to look at an example. So this is just a possible theoretical topic for an essay, let's say. So this is asking us to look at the impacts of the coal seam gas industry on Australia. So can anyone tell me in that topic, what are the important words here? What are the words that you would pick out and go, oh, that's important. I need to know that. I need to look at that. I need to use that word. Anyone in the chat?
Got to unmute, don't I? Sorry. So yeah, they're nailing it straight away. They've all picked impact. Just about everyone has straight away mentioned impact.
Yeah.
But then those that have kept typing, they've recognised coal seam gas industry and Australia.
Beautiful.
So they've nailed it. And Australia, yep.
Yep. For sure. So these are our keywords. And again, I know it sounds obvious, but I have many a time gone off on a bit of a tangent, looked at all this information, and all of a sudden you come back and you think, oh, I have all this great info on coal seam gas. How wonderful. But then you read that last word and go, oh, Australia. I have nothing on Australia. So it's really important to identify all those keywords so that you know where your search is taking you. You're not just sort of heading off aimlessly. So once we've got these words, great, we've got impact, we've got coal seam gas industry, we've got Australia. We want to break it down just a little bit further to help us. So we've got lots and lots of words to use in our research. Because when we go off in the next step and start actually looking, not everyone's going to use the word impact, or they might be talking about specific areas of Australia. So we need to break it down a bit more. So there's lots of ways to do this. This is just one. You might like more of like a concept map. This is a bit more of a sort of a logical one. Just depends what works for you. But what we want to do is go down the list of our key words or phrases and think of some associated words or synonyms. Synonyms just mean similar words. So can anyone think of any similar sort of words to coal seam gas industry? It doesn't have to be an exact synonym, but sort of words associated with it. Words that you think of when you think of coal seam gas. If you know what coal seam gas is. It's a pretty particular industry, depending on where you live in Australia, or it might not be something you've necessarily come across before. You got any brave people in the chat?
They've got some people saying here, mining industry.
Yeah.
Nicole nailed it, fracking.
Oh, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, that's the word we always look for. And Brock's got like greenhouse gases, underground,
Yeah.
natural gas, climate change. So that's so far what's coming through. Fracking. Yep. Yeah, Robin got fracking too. Well done, Robin.
Beautiful. Yeah. So that's right. So here's just some other words. So fracking, drilling, gas wells, water, aquifers, all of those things sort of associated with coal seam gas and that industry. Now, you can see there's not really like a synonym for coal seam gas, but there's words around it that we could use to sort of do our research that'll come in handy in our next step. So what about impact? Can anyone think of any words for impact? Impact does have some synonyms, but there's also some other impacts of the coal seam gas industry that I think people have already mentioned, but you might want to re-mention in the chat.
So they're starting to come through. Effect.
Yep.
And now influence, cause or positive effects, outcomes, the negative effects of the positive and negative outcome.
Yep.
To effect, to influence, and to change.
Definitely.
Threat. Now they haven't sort of picked up yet on the type of impact.
Yeah. Can we think of some good and bad impacts potentially? I think someone had.
Yeah, so let's impact a situation. So damage, pollution, ecodiversity, corrosion. I think Shadi might mean corrosion. So that's sort of like an environmental impact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So land dispute. Yep. Global warming. So environmental again. Environmental degradation. Good one, Ken. Yep.
Well done. Cool. Yeah. So that's right. There's sort of those synonyms for effect. So maybe for impact, sorry. So maybe things like effect, consequences. Then there's some positive impacts, let's say like economic impact, job creation, so on. And also some of the more negative ones like our environmental impacts, land clearing, CO2. Some people had some extra ones in there. Good job. Now, our last one is Australia. So a bit like coal seam gas industry, we're not going to find a synonym for Australia. I always use Australia as an example when I'm teaching people to paraphrase. You can't change Australia. You can't be like an island in the southern hemisphere and get really weirdly vague about it. So more so when we're thinking about Australia, maybe think about places where coal seam gas occurs rather than trying to reinvent the word Australia. So can
someone's got
anyone
Queensland, Northern New South Wales.
just high achievers here today? Yeah.
Oh, a Denny Mines. Yep.
Yeah.
So remote areas. Michael noted AU, and I think we talk about that in the study guide about the websites.au, which means that they're Australian websites. So that's a good pickup, Michael. Yeah, Rockhampton, Yeppoon Mines, regional areas, Arnhem Land, Bowen Basin. Yeah, so there you go.
So we just popped a few in here. So yes, things often fracking occurs in more farmland, agricultural, rural areas. So like everyone said, and just two examples, you know, it might be the Tara region in Queensland or the Hunter Valley in New South Wales, but you had lots more there. So this really helps us to sort of drill down a little bit more and give us some more words that will come in handy, and also give us a bit more of an understanding of the topic at hand. Another way to do this, to analyse our topic, is to look at our W and H questions. So think about the what, who, when, where, why, and how. I'll just give you a brief overview of this one. We won't go through it in detail, but this is just another way to sort of brainstorm ideas. So you might ask yourself, what is fracking? What might the positive and the negative impacts be? Who's benefiting from this? Who might be suffering? When, so maybe impacts change over time. Where, which we've already sort of pinpointed a few of those, where is this happening? Why, you might ask yourself, why is there a reliance on this industry? Why is there monetary gain from it? And how, so how does this actually happen? And you don't have to necessarily answer these questions at this particular stage, at this analyzing stage. Really, we're just getting some ideas out there. So we're just asking questions. So it's okay if you don't know the answers to these. I'm sure if you don't, you know, work or aren't highly familiar with coal seam gas, you probably don't. So that's okay. It's really just getting something on a page to think about. It's when we get to number 2, our next part, is where we actually find the scholarly text. So this is the part where we might learn a little bit more, and it's sort of, information starts to come into focus a little bit more. So you've probably all done some sort of research or other over time, whether that's at school or in your own personal life or for other work or study endeavours. But we do it a little bit differently at uni. We have a really specific way of going about research and specific places we want to look. So I always like to sort of think of it as like an iceberg. So there's all this freely available stuff out there that we can see, the stuff that you can find on Google and other search engines, easy to find. But then there's all this other stuff that's hidden. So if you're not at university, you might not know about this potentially, but there's all this other stuff underneath. So things like our library catalogues, library search, databases, all this stuff that isn't necessarily just generally publicly available and easy to find. So it's this stuff, this good hidden stuff, that we want to look for. So there's a couple of ways to go around that. First off, I want to introduce you to Library Search. So this is the CQU's search engine. It's similar to Google, but it only contains information from the library catalogue in terms of its books, ebooks, journals, that sort of scholarly information. So the stuff we want for our essays and reports and our university research. Now, library search, very simple to find. Oh, sorry, Trix, did we have a question?
Can you flick back to the last screen for a sec for Nikki? That one. I think that's the one, Nicole. And just here on the side note, while Nikki's making notes on that, Brodie mentions that traditional owners come up with a lot of opposition to fracking, which could be a good avenue for research, actually, research that side of it as well.
Certainly in those rural areas, there's concerns around land.
Okay, yeah. Nicole says keep going. She'll wait for the recording to come out. Okay, sorry, Nick.
Okay. Yes, so library search. Let me show you. It's pretty straightforward to find. If you go to the university website, and up the top, just on the homepage, is this library button. When you press on it, it takes you to a page that looks just like this one, except without the red box. I've just got that there to highlight. This is library search right here. So like I said, similar in look, I guess, to Google. You just type straight into the box here. It's a bit different though in terms of how we search and what we're searching for. I'll move on to that in a sec, but another important little part that I want to draw your attention to is databases. So you might hear this word come up a bit, but a database is just a collection of information that's stored electronically. That might be all different things: newspapers, journals, books, so on and so forth. And our library pays lots and lots of money to subscribe to these databases, so we have access to them. So there's lots of different ones. Some are industry specific. So when you go on to do your degree, there might be some that you will be asked to look at. So some of you might have heard of this one before, but it's a common one. PubMed in all the sort of medical disciplines is a really common database that people like to look through. And some of these databases can't be accessed through just normal library search. You don't need to worry too much about this just yet, but it's just something to keep in mind. And it'll be something that you'll learn about when you go onto your degree. You'll be told these databases are good for finding X, Y, Z. Another example from the study guide is News Source Plus. So if you were looking for actual newspapers from local and international newspapers, they're not available through library search. You have to go to the databases. Again, not super hard to find. That exact same page we looked at before, where we had our library search bar, library search is there. If you click databases, it will change it to databases, and then you can have a look at them all. So it might be worth, while you're still in prep skills, just having a bit of play around, having a look through the databases. They come in a big list, and each database is listed by its heading and a bit of an explanation of what is in there. So have a bit of a look, but at this stage, not too important. Probably get the gist of library search first. Okay, so circling back to library search. Now, I always say to my students, you cannot treat library search like Google. You cannot say to library search, "Hi, library search, what is fracking?" That's not how we approach it. We need to be a bit more strategic in our searches. And that's just because when you're using library search, it has so much information in there. We really need to tell it what we want. Google has algorithms in the background that decide what you want and decide what you're going to see. Library search does not. So we need to be a bit more strategic in how we advise it to search for us. So one way to do that is to use what we call Boolean operators. So a really common one here is AND. So if we are searching for coal seam gas and Australia, so we don't want to know about coal seam gas anywhere else, we just want to know about it in Australia. When we go to type that into library search, we just put the AND there in capital letters. So that way it knows. It knows that those are the two things we want. I don't want coal seam gas in South Africa. I don't want another type of mining in Australia. I want those two things together. So that's an example of us sort of telling library search what we want. This also works in Google. If you ever use Google, I'm sure we all do. These Boolean operators work in pretty much most search engines, but they're very important when you're using sort of academic search engines like library search. Now, all these Boolean operators are also listed in your study guide, so have a bit of a look through to get some more information. Another really handy one is phrase searches. So, oh yes, sorry, Trix, go.
No, Bree. The boys are just asking about, so instead of using plus, now I've never used plus before, but
works the same way.
Right. Oh, you can do plus, righto, instead of and.
Yeah, so
I've never used that.
Yeah. Yep. So you can do plus and sort of work or interchangeable. The other one is like the negative, like the minus symbol that works as like a not. So sorry, flicking back for a sec. So let's say you didn't want to search Australia, you didn't care at all about Australia, and you said you wanted a not between these two, you can also use a minus. Yeah. That's becoming more and more common. It used to be quite rare, but it's always worked the same way. Yeah, so another one is phrase searching. So this keeps our words together. That might sound silly, but we don't want to know about coal and seam and gas. those words on their own mean different things. We want to know about coal seam gas altogether. So we pop it in our double quote marks. Otherwise, you may end up with information maybe about coal mining or methane gas or, you know, other things that aren't necessarily coal seam gas. So that just keeps it all together. It's the same, the example in the study guide is Great Barrier Reef. And sometimes, yeah, you get other great things, you get other barriers and you get completely different reefs. So we want to pop those in the double quote marks to keep it all together when we're searching. Now, we're not going to go through all the tips and tricks in this lecture. We just don't have time, but there are a range of videos on Moodle that you can watch. And like I said, there's more information in the study guide. So these 4 videos give you a bit of an overview. This first one gives you an idea of library search. And then the second one, activity 4-3, is a bit of a demonstration, of how to refine a search. So make it more specific. Now, I'll just let you know some of the imagery in these videos looks slightly different. It's just because the CQ website has had a bit of a facelift. It all still works the same way, but the website looks a bit different. So don't panic if you start these videos and think, oh, that doesn't look quite like mine looks. Works the same way, just looks a touch different. We unfortunately haven't had the time to update them just yet, but that'll be a future job. Okay, so before I move on to number 3, any questions about this, about searching, search terms?
Nothing's come up in the chat. We have just been chatting just briefly about newspapers, magazines, just, you know, the credibility, the agenda behind it all. So that's sort of been going on in the background.
Oh, good.
On our little chat as well.
Oh, we're preempting number 3. Yeah. So
actually, what other web search engines are there? Kyle's asking.
Oh, we are going to talk about that in a second, but yeah, there's also, so there's library search. You can also use Google Scholar is another one, and I'll talk a little bit in a sec about Google Advanced, but we'll go into that a little bit more. So evaluating our research. So when we are looking and finding all of this information that we're wanting to use in an assignment, we really need to choose carefully. So unfortunately, there isn't like a nice big approved stamp that goes on this information. That would be nice. It would make all of our lives easier, but there isn't. So we have to make our own judgment and decide whether the information we've come across, whether the source, whatever it is going to meet our needs. So one way that we can do that we teach in steps is called the RAIOC framework, and it looks a bit like this. So we think about its relevance, so how it fits with your topic, like is it actually going to be useful or is it sort of going off on a tangent that isn't necessarily what you need? We think about authority, so the trustworthiness of the author, organisation, how much can we trust this? Objectivity, we want to think if there's any obvious bias, is it balanced? Are they backing this up? Does it sound factual? Is it non-emotional? So sometimes you read things and they're quite emotional. They're sort of given from that someone's perspective, and that's fine for, you know, general reading, obviously, but when we're looking for something to use in an assignment, we want it to be balanced. And finally, currency. So is it recent enough for the nature of our topic? So these are sort of our key points to think about when we're assessing and looking at our sources. One way to remember this is to review all options carefully, or we sometimes just call it RAIOC, which is just the first letters of each of the words. So let me give you a little more information on how to use this. So let's pretend we've gone off and we've done a bit of a search in library search, and we've kind of come across an academic journal article. Does anyone know what an academic journal article is? Has anyone ever come across this before?
Kyle's got peer reviewed. So that terminology about being peer reviewed.
Yes, I'll talk about that in just a sec. Should be giving this lecture, Kyle.
And Brody says the same. It's a peer-reviewed research paper.
Yeah, potentially. Yep. So yes, journal articles, yes, are research papers. So someone has either done some research or evaluated some research, and then they've written about it. So they're generally written by sort of experts in the field, but we do still need to apply our RAOC framework. So relevance, obviously, is a pretty easy one. Depends on our topic. So is it relevant to what we're needing to write about? When we think about authority, we need to think about the editorial process and whether it's peer reviewed. Is it written by academics and researchers, which usually is a journal article? It is. I'll talk about peer reviewed in a sec. Our objectivity, are the claims backed up? Is there a nice big long reference list with lots of information about where all these sources and all of this information you're reading came from? And again, is it written in a factual, non-emotional way? And finally, our currency, and this does depend on your topic. Do we have any clever cookies that know anything about currency, how current our information might need to be for any topic? Pick a topic.
Here we go. 5 years and under, up to date, within 5 years. Yeah, they changed it. I always say 10 years. So yeah, EWU must be saying 5 years.
Yeah, so generally 10 years is acceptable for most disciplines, but if you're going into a medical discipline, 5, just because medicine changes quite a bit.
True.
So 5 years generally for like nursing and all those other medical areas. 10 years is okay, but I think in essay writing now, it is sort of advised that if you can find more stuff in that 5-year period is good. The only exception to this that you might hear is what we call seminal works. So they're like the really important ones. They might have been written quite a long time ago. And often this is information you're given within your studies. So like a textbook or maybe an article that your lecturer provides on Moodle. And sometimes they're a bit older. So I know when I did my degree, I majored in history, and obviously there's some things written about history that were written a while ago. So some of those seminal works, even though they're from quite a long time ago, are still current. So it depends.
Kiana mentioned here that in EWU, I'm guessing, Kiana, they're doing technology, so they've got to go within the last 5 years, which makes sense because technology is changing a lot. And even now when we think about COVID, a lot of that COVID research now, things are starting to change. Like we've gone past that, so we're in the post-COVID era now. So, some of that research from there will date very fast. And even AI, that is going to be this new wave of research from pre-AI era to post-AI era.
Yeah.
So, Kate says, what about philosophy?
Yes, philosophy would be a bit like history.
Exactly. Yes.
There would be some works that are quite a bit older, but you'd still be looking for up-to-date works because people are always doing more research and always rereading older texts and looking into it. So there'll always be more current research, but yes, it really does depend on the topic. So like you said, Trix, yes, if it's something that's a bit more to do with tech and things like that are rapidly changing. Sorry, no hard and fast rules, everyone.
And Brody just says here, shouldn't it be in our assessment overview for clarity? Look, it's more an accepted time frame. And when you go into your undergraduate degree and you're doing assessments, they will basically inform you as to the currency that they want to see in their assessments. So it's about understanding your discipline area and what they're looking for. Education, we're a bit more lenient because, nothing really changes in the way. There's a few changes, but whereas other discipline areas, yes. So ask your lecturer is the key rule.
That's the best advice. And yeah, often they do have it in the assignment information. I was talking to a nursing student just the other day and it was really clear in her assignment, 5 years is what they wanted, nothing older than 5 years. So just check that information. So going back to peer reviewed as promised. So some of you might have come across this before, but peer reviewed just means that these journal articles are reviewed by other experts in the field before they're published. They may be rejected. They may have to go back and change things. So, if anyone ever can remember X Factor, it's a bit like that. There's these judges who sit there. They might be a bit ruthless and they decide whether or not this article is going to be published as a peer-reviewed journal or not, or if things need to be adjusted. So that's a really good way of identifying if something is quite an authoritative source, is whether it's gone through this peer-reviewed process. So we've spoken a bit about journal articles, but another place that you might be getting information is from websites. So websites are a touch more difficult. So I'm going to go through a few extra bits on a website. Not quite as simple as a journal article, so we need to be a bit more careful in our judgment. So, of course, we need to know if it's relevant. So question 1, is this relevant? Is it talking about, in our example, coal seam gas in Australia? We then need to figure out who the author or organisation is that's responsible. Now, this might not always be super clear on a website. It might not, unlike a journal article that often has an author, like one person or a couple of people. Sometimes websites, it's an organisation. So keep that in mind. It might not necessarily just be one person. It might not be Bree Knight writing the website. It might be CQ University. We need to think about reliability of the source. So in thinking about that, we might need to question sort of the qualifications and background of the people or of the organisation we're looking at. So we just need to dig a bit deeper and think a little more critically about websites. We don't have the luxury of a peer review process, so we need to think a little more. We also need to think about who's responsible and what might their motives be. So why does this website exist? Why are they telling me this? You can go through and think about their standpoint. So is the way it's written a bit impartial, or is it biased? So how is this written? Is anything stand out, like they're trying to convince me of something, or are they just trying to give me some facts? A big one is there sort of evidence of where they got this information from? Because the reality is I can start a website and tell you lots of different things, but we need to know where the information's coming from. And a really good website will list that. That information will be there. They will have references. And when was the information posted or last updated? So again, quite credible websites will often have a date, whether that's up the top, or sometimes you have to scroll all the way to the bottom and it'll be in the bottom. But we need to know, when did this occur? When was all this information published? Because it might not be correct anymore. It could have completely changed. So like I said, we need to be a bit more careful when we're looking at websites and ask a few more questions. So this still is within that RAIOC framework. So you can see this first part is our relevance, the green part is our authority, our blue is our objectivity, and our last part here is currency. So we're still definitely going through that RAIOC framework, but we're maybe just asking a few more questions of a website than we necessarily would when we were looking at a journal article. So we might need to break it down. So keep that in mind if you are looking at websites, to just be a bit critical. Now, I think Trix mentioned that there was a little bit of talk already about this in the chat, but can anyone tell me what websites we might look for? So what might be an indicator of a reliable website?
Here we go. Great. So we've got .gov.au, .org, great, .edu, .abs, government websites.
You're all too good.
Yeah, they nailed it. They nailed it.
Beautiful.
No one's put in .com.
Very good.
You know, they're actually really focusing in or targeting in on the types of websites that we're going to get the strongest, most credible information.
Yeah, definitely. So yes, as everyone said, .org, .edu, .gov, .gov.au. So these indicate sort of where the information is coming from. So obviously .gov or .gov.au is from government websites. EDU is from educational institutions. .org is from organisations. So just keep in mind that obviously some organisations do have certain agendas. Doesn't mean that they're bad agendas. but it's just something to keep in mind. You know, for example, the Cancer Council often has like a .org website, but that doesn't mean their intentions are bad. They want to raise money for cancer research, which is a perfectly good agenda, but it's just something to keep in mind that .orgs are often organisations, or are organisations, I should say. And yes, we sort of want to avoid our .coms. So .coms are commercial websites. So often, mostly, they have an objective, and that's generally to sell you something. They usually have like a commercial interest. So you might consider using Google Advanced Search, and you can actually limit by these websites. So I'll just show you a screenshot. There's a video as well on the Moodle page about how to do this. But when you go into advanced search, you'll see that you can sort of limit by all of these things here. And if you keep scrolling down, you can also narrow your search by just putting in the .gov or .gov.au or whatever it is you're looking for. So it just sort of helps you narrow that search. So I'd suggest going on to Moodle and watching that video about Google Advanced. Gives you a bit of information about how to narrow that. So, as promised, another place that you can get information from is from Google Scholar. Has anyone used Google Scholar before? Yeah, Trix loves Google Scholar. A few people, yeah. So
Yeah.
unlike just regular Google, Google Scholar does give you access to more scholarly resources. So you can use that as well. That's another option. Some people really love Google Scholar. Some people prefer library search. Honestly, as long as you're getting good sources, that's what matters. So have a look. We also have information on Google Scholar on our Moodle page. I'd suggest you have a play with both and see what works for you. I always use both, to be honest.
Bree, on Google Scholar, I just put this in the chat earlier, that suggested that the students actually link it to their CQ University account. Do we have information through Prep Skills on that one, or is that through the library?
Nope. So there is the video on Google Scholar on our Moodle page. If you watch that video, that actually shows you how to link it.
Good.
Yeah.
So I'd suggest that all students do that. That way it shows if it's accessible from the CQ University library.
Yeah, that's the trick. The only problem is if you just go to Google Scholar and don't link it, you might find really great sources, but you might not have access to them, or it might ask you to pay for them. So yeah, good hint. Tricks, make sure you go on and link those. And there's a video on how to do that on the module 4 tile. Okay, so heading back to our example, let's have a go at applying our RAOC skills right here and now. So what I'm going to do is I am going to show you 4 different websites, because as I said, websites are a bit trickier. So let's start with the hard stuff. Why not? I have faith in you. Answers today have been brilliant. So we're going to look at 4, and I don't want you to comment just yet. Just write down the heading of the website, write maybe RAOC, and pop in some notes about what you think. If you think this is relevant to our topic, so remember our topic is the impact of coal seam gas on Australia. Do we think it has authority? Is it objective? Currency is a little bit tricky because I'm just showing you a cutout. So we won't worry too much about currency at this point, but those first 3, especially the authority and objectivity, are what we want to think about. So let's start with website 1, Arrow Energy. So have a look at this. They've got a little bit of a write-up of what coal seam gas is, got some pictures, talks about how it works. It's different types of gas. They use it for cooking and heating. Just have a think. Look at this website and have a think if you think this has authority, objectivity. How might it stack up? Okay, so let's have a look at our next one. Don't stress, don't overthink this. We'll talk about it at the end. Our next one is Lock the Gate Alliance. So this is another website. have a think about what sort of organisation you think this might be. As with the last website, it's also got some information about coal seam gas. That information might be slightly different, might be coming from a different perspective. There's some information over here that might be interesting. So just write in your notes what you think about this one. Would you be using this one in your assignment? I don't know. Have a think. Okay, let's go to number 3. Number 3 is the CSIRO, which is the Commonwealth Science and Industrial Research Organisation. So you might recognise this organisation. You might have come across it before, maybe you haven't. Again, they've got a bit of information about coal seam gas here. Write some notes. What do you think of this one? Do we think it has authority? Do we think it might be objective or not? Okay, our final contender, number 4. This is an article from The Conversation. So if you're doing EWU this term, you might already know what The Conversation is. If not, that's okay. Just note down again what we think of this one in your notes. Credible, not credible, I don't know, have a think. Okay, so let's go through the answers. I'll put you out of your misery. So first of all, Arrow Energy. Who wants to tell me whether or not we think this is a good source for our topic? Do we think this is a reliable source? Does it have authority, objectivity? What do we reckon? Pop your thoughts in the chat now.
I've got to try and actually work out which comments now are the ones that are.
Oh, sorry.
I know what you've actually just said, because there's been a few scattering throughout as
Okay.
we're doing it. I might start okay, so Robin has said no objectivity. Brock said they may rely on CSG for their business as an energy company, so they have an agenda to dismiss worries. And then Rory seems to be an energy company, so is inherently, oh, for goodness sake, biased. And Arrow, yeah, Arrow's like, yeah. I was just adding a few more in and into there. Yeah, Arrow bias. So very much seems to be that they are a company and they have a bias.
Yeah, good job, everyone. So yeah, this one probably not ideal if we're looking at scholarly information. It might be interesting to read that perspective, but yeah, not necessarily something we want to be using in our assignment. So what about the Lock the Gate Alliance? What do we all think of that one?
Kyle says no. But let's see the justifications for no.
Just no.
No, just no. Just no. Nope. I'll see what comes up. Very anti.
Yep.
Yeah. Steadless at homes. Want your money. Yeah, want your money. Yeah. They're strongly against the gas. Yes. So people are seeing that there seems to be an environmental conservation organization, so they would oppose CSG. Yes.
Yeah, so that's right. So similarly to Arrow Energy, but for different reasons, this is also another one that we might be a bit skeptical of. So as everyone's identified, clever. Sort of either side of the scale, isn't it? You've got one company, Arrow Energy, that are obviously profiting off coal seam gas. So they have an agenda. They care about coal seam gas quite a bit, obviously. Then the Lock the Gate Alliance is a group that were petitioning or are petitioning to not frack and not have coal seam gas. So obviously they're the other side of the argument. So that's not really what we're looking for in an academic essay or report that we're writing necessarily. So we sort of want to steer away from those sort of extreme ends of the spectrum and look at some more middle ground and a different perspective. So what about the CSIRO? What do we think about that one?
So we got people saying, yes, CSIRO, yep, RAOC, yep, tick, tick. The CSIRO, it's a government-funded research organisation, so yes, it would be more credible. It's academic, it's based on research. And one of the first sentences says something about the most recent quantitative research that was undertaken, so yeah, fact-based metrics.
Exactly.
And in Brock must have looked into it while we had on the screen, saying discuss the effects of CO2 emissions, but also mentioned the lack of certainty on the research. So that'd be something and that also shows a good objectivity when they're actually stating that.
Yes, definitely. So we'd give that one the tick. Also, when you're looking at the CSIRO website, they do have the information of where the data's come from. So you can actually have a look at those studies if you're interested and dig in a little bit deeper. Whereas often with websites like Arrow Energy and Lock the Gate Alliance, it's tricky to sort of determine where the information's coming from, which doesn't really help you back up your evidence in an assignment. So it's good to be able to look into it a bit further. Okay, last but not least, the conversation. First of all, can anyone tell me if we're happy with the conversation? And second, can anyone tell me what the conversation is?
We actually had a little tiny bit of a chatter about this much earlier on. So they've probably got a little bit of bias from what I actually mentioned in relation to it. Let's see what gets said. Okay, people, start chatting. Okay, so the conversation is an online source of thought-provoking articles written by researchers and academics across all disciplines for the public global. Did you copy and paste that, Brodie?
Yeah. Good job, Brodie.
It's a newspaper where academics pass their point of view. Yeah. So, and it is sort of like it's an online newspaper.
Yeah.
Not-for-profit organisation, so maybe has no agenda. It's a good point. Maybe. Potentially there's always agendas, but unfortunately. Can I get the facts right? Less objective than journal papers, but still pretty usable.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it's not to the same standard as a journal, but often in the conversation, it is academics writing about journals they've published. So sometimes it can be a really good idea to go through the conversation, sort of get an idea or a gist for what the research is in this area. And they usually link to journal articles too. So that's always helpful. So yeah, they're decent sources. Like we said, maybe not at the same level as a journal article, but not a bad thing either.
And I was saying in my chat that it's one that I've actually used even in my PhD. I've actually referred to the conversation because there's been some things that have been highlighted, but then I'll actually go to the paper and, might be Pittman mentioned something. So I'll go to his paper and have a look, and then I'll actually cite that as well. So, yeah.
Very true. Now, just a caveat on all of this, there's also no guarantees. So like this isn't a perfect science. And depending on what you're writing and why, you might look at different sources for different reasons within your discipline, whatever you go on to study later. So it's always a good idea if you're in doubt to check with your lecturer because they're the expert. They know what you need to look for.
On a side note too, Brie, I noticed on that conversation one, at the top, normally it's an actual academic's
Yes.
name, whereas that was probably the first time I've seen one there. All it said was published December. It didn't actually say who the author was. Now, normally it's an actual author
I
presenting
think
their viewpoint. It might be right down the bottom. It might say
I was
who
going to say, I think because we've squished it to take a picture of it here, it's cut their name out of the
cut the
topic.
name out. Okay.
But yes, I thought that as I saw it and thought, oh, where's the author gone?
Where's the author's name? Yeah, because normally it's up there, published
Oh,
up beside the date.
yes. I think it was actually over here, but to fit it on the slide.
Oh,
Yeah,
we took
sorry.
it
I'll have
out.
to
That's what it
recut
is.
one next time because I thought the same thing. I thought,
Bring
oh,
up
that's a bit
another.
annoying. Yes, but Trixie's exactly right. Often has a link to the author and information about them and other articles they've written, which is really handy. Okay. So getting past all of this.
Kevin says, is it 95.2% or 100%? And Kyle, you're right. Look, straight away, that image, and this is again what you've got to be careful of. Images can be deceptive. And you see the protests. And so straight away, even when I looked at it, I went, oh, really? The conversation's doing that? But you really need to check the article. So Kevin, I'm not sure what you mean. You meaning authoritative? I'd probably say 95% authoritative. Bit less actually, but anyway.
Yeah. Alrighty. So thinking about all these places we can find information, what do we think of Wikipedia? Can we use it for our academic research?
So Ella come back.
I can see Emma giving the thumbs down.
Yeah. So Ella says no. Anyone can contribute to the information on Wikipedia.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a great website, but don't cite it. Rory says,
yeah.
If you can change the wiki entry to your answer. Not sure. Lots of misinformation. It could potentially be lots of misinformation. Very good.
Yes. Yep, perfect. Exactly. So nothing wrong with having a read of the page just to get your head around something, but you really need to dig deeper after that. It's just a general sort of overview, and exactly, I think it was Ella did Trix say, said about people can change it. Totally. I used to have an associate, a person I knew, an acquaintance, who used to love to start an argument and then would go onto Wikipedia to check if they were right and then would change the page to make sure they were right. I do think it's getting a touch harder to change them at will because there is like monitors and stuff on there, but it's no perfect science. People just volunteer and contribute. So no, not ideal for academic research. Okay, so let's get to the end of our lecture for today. A couple of reminders. We want to use the RAOC framework. So one easy way to remember that is review all options carefully. There are some great activities this week in the study guide and on Moodle that can help you sort of have a play with this framework and see if you can master it. We had a look at the information literacy 4 key skills. So we had a look at planning our attack, finding scholarly texts, evaluating research, as I said at the top. In week 5, module 5, we're going to take a brief look at manage and present your research, but really where you're going to do the bulk of that is in essay writing. So whether that's this term or in a future term, that's where you're really going to put that into action. Now, we like to think of it as a bit of a cycle. So you sort of plan, locate, evaluate, manage and present. But just to be clear, this isn't often a perfect cycle. You might plan, you might locate information, you might think, oh, I don't think I planned very well, I'm getting weird information. You might go back, you might plan again, you might locate, you might evaluate. Again, you might think, oh, this is awful information, and go back, locate. So although we like to put it as a bit of a cycle, no perfect cycle. There should be arrows going in all directions, back and forth, all over the place. You might even get all the way to the manage and present, so the writing part, and think, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, I've got to go back to plan, locate again. So it's okay to move around this cycle and to sort of, jump about a little bit to get it right. So a couple of take-home messages for you. Please have a go at going beyond Google. Jump down underneath that iceberg into the water there. Have a look at library search and the library databases, Google Scholar, have a bit of a play around and get used to them. Like I said, all those videos on Moodle will give you some specific instructions. Try and be strategic, so don't flail around in your researching. Try and go through those steps. Plan, use the strategies, refine the search. And when you're selecting, be careful. So as we saw, there is information out there, lots and lots and lots of it, but it doesn't mean it's good information. So we need to think through that RAIOC framework. So what now? Have a look at Moodle, download that information literacy guide, work through the week 4 activities, watch those videos to get a better understanding of some of these search techniques. It's a good idea, if you can, to attend either an on-campus tute, which are on the Tuesday, or if you're an online student, we will be having our online workshop on Wednesday. I will be there. You'll be sick of me by the end of this week. And we'll be looking at some different strategies. We'll be having a play around with our research. If you are confused in any way, please contact your support lecturer. Everyone should definitely by now know who their support lecturer is. You should have received an email from them, so make sure you double check that. If you're confused, just reach out. Couple of reminders. Do not forget, quiz 1 is due at the end of week 6. So that's based on module 4 and 5. So don't get too excited just yet. You need to do module 5. But once you've done module 4 and 5, then you're going to be ready for our first quiz, quiz 1. A more pressing reminder is that your LPA is due at the end of week 4, which is this week. It is due this Friday. So please don't forget. Again, if you're a bit nervous or don't know what you need to do, or you're confused, or you've gone over the word count, have a look at the study guide, associate yourself with what's going on, go onto Moodle, see if you can answer your own question first. But then if you are still lost, reach out to your support lecturer and they'll be able to point you in the right direction and get you all set. And other than that, I just want to say a big thank you for being such wonderful participants this week and giving some lovely and very thoughtful answers. So good job, everyone. Hopefully this will help you in your research into the future.